The tall, ornate doors of the Marble Street courthouse creaked open, letting in a gust of warm wind from the late summer Harlem streets. Inside, the massive chamber, constructed with echoing domes and cold white stone, held a tense silence. It was not the usual silence of respect for the law. No, this silence was more skeptical. Disbelieving. Two black women in navy wool suits stood at the defense table, their silhouettes sharp against the polished mahogany. "Who are they supposed to be?" one juror whispered to another behind cupped hands. "They're the accused," a bailiff muttered nearby. "Say they're representing themselves." "God help us." Amara and Lenora Wells, 25 years old and barely a year out of school, stood unmoving, each with her hands clasped at her front. They were twins in more than appearance. Amara's resolve mirrored Lenora's discipline, and Lenora's fire echoed Amara's grace. They were not here to beg. They were here to make the system hear them. At the bench sat Judge Horace Delacroix, a man with silver streaks through his dark hair and contempt embedded in the creases of his face. Delacroix had made a name for himself by preserving decorum, a euphemism, as many knew, for keeping young black attorneys, especially women, in their supposed place. His gavel pounded. "Let me be clear," he said, his drawl echoing in the marble chamber. "This court is no place for theatrics. You two young women," he paused to let the disdain drip, "intend to represent yourselves in this proceeding?" "Yes, Your Honor," Amara replied, her tone calm but resonant. "We are both licensed members of the New York Bar, and fully capable of defending ourselves against these accusations." A few quiet scoffs sounded from the gallery. A white-haired reporter from the Herald scribbled quickly, then smirked to himself. Judge Delacroix blinked, leaning forward. "And what, pray tell, makes you think you're qualified to argue against the district attorney's office? You think reading a few books qualifies you for war?" "We've read the Constitution," Lenora said, stepping beside her sister. "And in our country, that's where justice begins." There was a long silence. Then, as though a signal had passed, laughter bubbled up from the gallery. Not from everyone. A few people near the back, a cluster of Harlem teachers and two church elders, watched in silence, eyes narrowed. But the bulk of the room saw only children pretending to wear their parents' shoes. Delacroix leaned back with a tired sigh, motioning to the prosecutor. Edwin Sloan stood. Mid-40s, suited in beige and blue, his hair slicked back and his teeth gleaming behind a smug grin. "Your Honor," Sloan said, "I'll keep it short. These two women, who were arrested interfering with a lawful police investigation, have turned this into a spectacle. This isn't a suffragette protest. This is a criminal case. And they are clearly unfit for such proceedings." He turned to the sisters with mock kindness. "Take the plea. Pay the fine. Get back to your book club." Lenora's fingers twitched. Amar raised a hand and stepped forward. "We have filed a motion to dismiss the charges on the grounds that our arrest violated the Fourth Amendment. The officers involved fabricated their reports. We intend to demonstrate that." She handed a folded document to the clerk. Delacroix didn't even glance at it. "Denied." "You haven't even read it," Lenora objected. "I don't need to read it," the judge snapped. "This isn't a classroom. I don't entertain frivolity in my courtroom." "Is the Constitution frivolous?" Amara asked, her tone as sharp as a blade cloaked in velvet. A wave of murmurs swept the court. Reporters leaned forward. Sloan chuckled. "You see what I mean, Your Honor? They're turning this into a soapbox." Delacroix banged his gavel. "No more speeches from the defense. One more word out of line, and I'll have you removed." Lenora took a deliberate step forward. "With respect, Judge Delacroix, if you remove us, this becomes a headline, 2 Negro attorneys silenced in court." The room froze. Delacroix stared at them for a long, tense moment. His face reddened, jaw working. Then slowly, with visible restraint, he sat back in his chair. "Fine," he said. "You have 5 minutes to make your case. Use them wisely." The tension broke with a breath. Amara stepped into the open floor and began to speak. She spoke not like someone pleading for innocence but like someone exposing rot. She dismantled the arresting officer's timeline, highlighted inconsistencies, and cited Weeks v. United States and Powell v. Alabama with perfect rhythm. Even Sloan, smug moments earlier, began rifling through his notes, sweat prickling at his temples. As Amara finished, Judge Delacroix stared at her. Then he banged his gavel again. "We'll recess for 15 minutes. He stood abruptly and vanished into his chambers. In the hallway outside, a journalist from the Amsterdam News pulled out his notepad and approached the sisters. "Did you two study under William Hastie?" he asked, genuinely impressed. Lenora shook her head. "We studied under Estelle Wells, she said. "Our grandmother." The reporter raised his eyebrows. "You'll have to tell me more." Amara smiled faintly. "If there's time." She looked over at Lenora, whose eyes gleamed. "We just shook the courtroom," she said. Amara nodded. "And we're only getting started." 10 years earlier, the musty scent of old paper, stale chalk, and floor wax filled the Harlem Community Library. It was nearly empty on most weekends, save for the two girls who occupied the back corner every Saturday afternoon, their legs swinging under the long wooden table, their heads bent over enormous books. Amara and Lenora Wells had barely reached their teenage years, but already, they read case law like others read comics. While their friends played stickball or listened to jazz on the radio, the sisters flipped pages of thick legal tomes. Across the table, their grandmother, Estelle Wells, sat reading quietly, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes peeking over the tops of her reading glasses every few minutes. She was more than just a librarian, she was their first teacher, their fiercest protector, and their greatest believer. "You know," Amara said, finger tracing a paragraph in Brown v. Board of Education, "this case says we have the right to the same education as everyone else." Lenore looked up from Gideon v. Wainwright. "Doesn't mean they'll actually give it to us." Estelle glanced at them, her voice low but firm. "Rights are not handed out, girls. You either claim them or you get none at all." The sisters looked at each other, neither speaking, but each silently committing those words to memory. Back in their tiny apartment on 141st Street that evening, the scent of simmering lentils filled the air. Estelle stood at the stove, slicing green onions, as the girls sat at the kitchen table scribbling notes from their latest research. "Why are we learning about court cases instead of algebra like everyone else?" Lenore had asked once. Estelle never gave the answer gently. "Because one day, you'll be stopped by a man in a uniform who sees your skin before he sees your mind. And in that moment, knowing the Fourth Amendment might keep your heart beating long enough to get home." The room had gone quiet then. Not because they didn't believe her, but because they did. Fast forward to 2 weeks before the trial. The August air in Harlem was thick, muggy, and restless. Amara sat at their grandmother's kitchen table, untouched coffee in front of her, watching steam curl from the surface. Lenora paced near the window, arms crossed tightly against her chest. "They're framing us," Lenora muttered. "They know we didn't start that commotion. They just don't like that we spoke up. And worse," Amara added, "they hate that we know the law better than they expected." Estelle stirred a pot on the stove. "When people fear they'll be exposed, they strike. And when they strike, they don't always aim with reason, they aim to silence." There was a knock at the door. Lenora opened it to find a plain manila envelope, no note attached. Inside were grainy photos of them at the protest and a typed message, "Drop the defense. This is your last warning." Lenora's hands trembled. "This is getting dangerous." Amara looked to Estelle. "What do we do?" The old woman didn't blink. "You hit them where they never expect it, courtroom, paper, truth." 3 days later, the sisters found themselves walking home late from the grocer when they heard it, a scuffle, raised voices, and a man's panicked cries. Rounding the corner, they saw 2 policemen pinning a young black man to the hood of a squad car. "Stop resisting." The older cop barked. "I'm not resisting." The man gasped, his face pressed against the metal. Amara froze. She'd seen scenes like this on the news, but now it was here, breathing in front of her. Lenora was already pulling out her phone. "Excuse me." Lenora called out. "What's the charge?" The older officer spun around. "Mind your business, girl." "This is our business," Amara said, stepping beside her sister. "We're citizens. We have the right to observe." "Back away or be detained," the younger cop warned, his hand hovering near his baton. Lenora kept filming. That was the moment it happened. The older officer charged. Within seconds, both sisters were slammed against the squad car. Lenora's phone hit the pavement and cracked. The man they tried to defend was shoved into the back seat. And Amara could feel the zip-tie cuffs biting into her wrists. The holding cell stank of urine and mildew. Amara and Lenora sat side by side on a steel bench, each nursing sore wrists. Across from them, the man they tried to protect sat rubbing his bruised jaw. "Jerome Carter," he said quietly. "Appreciate what you did, even if it got you locked up." "We couldn't let them hurt you," Amara replied. Jerome chuckled without humor. "They still might. Not just me. Y'all too. People who speak up usually vanish before anyone remembers their names." Lenora's voice was like gravel. "Then I guess we'll have to make sure everyone remembers ours." The next morning, Amara was the first to be released. As she stepped outside the station, Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed quiet." She turned the screen toward Lenora, who had just walked out. "Still think this is just about us and a cop?" Amara asked. "No," Lenora replied. "This is about something bigger." That night, at home, Estelle sat silently as the girls explained what had happened. "The arrest was staged," Lenora said. "They wanted us to be seen as troublemakers. They know we can beat them in court," Amara added. Estelle stared at them both, her voice low. "They're not just trying to ruin your names. They're trying to scare you out of fighting." Amara and Lenora sat silent for a beat. Then Lenora whispered, "So what do we do?" Estelle met their eyes. "You fight smart. You find the flaw in their story. Because there's always a crack in a lie." The next morning, the sisters began digging into police records, street surveillance logs, and arrest reports. Within 24 hours, they found it. The arresting officer, Sergeant Doyle, claimed they had interfered with police action at 7:52 p.m. But the dispatch logs showed the patrol car hadn't arrived until 8:04. A 12-minute discrepancy. They weren't even there. Amara held up the report. "We have them." Lenora's eyes glowed with satisfaction. "And now," she said, "we make them regret underestimating us." The courtroom sat still like a beast just woken, its marbled walls reverberating with the tension of what was coming. Amara and Lenora Wells stood side by side at the defendant's table, each wearing a tailored navy suit that fit like armor. The polished wood beneath their palms felt cool, grounding. Reporters lined the back wall, whispering in anticipation. Cameras clicked like distant thunder. Across from them, Assistant District Attorney Victor Granger, a man known for his courtroom theatrics and unmatched conviction record, sat smugly. His graying temples and pinstripe suit gave him the appearance of dignity, but Amara could see the contempt behind his gaze. Judge Tenenbaum, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, entered through the side door with a thud of her gavel. "This court is now in session." As the murmurs died down, Granger rose slowly, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor," he said, his voice practiced and smooth. "The state is prepared to proceed with the charges against the defendants, Miss Amara and Miss Lenora Wells. These young women, while intelligent and undoubtedly educated, chose to obstruct justice by interfering with lawful police procedures. What began as public disruption has now spiraled into a case about character. Or rather, the lack of it." A slight murmur rippled through the crowd. Amara's jaw tightened. Lenora merely smirked. Granger continued, "The defense would like to make this about race, about injustice. But what we are here to determine is not history, it is action. Their actions." Judge Tannenbaum gave a single nod. "Defense, your opening statement." Amara stood. Her voice was even, deliberate. "The prosecution says this is about action. But let's talk about whose actions are under scrutiny. Our clients did not assault anyone. They did not break any laws. They recorded police officers using excessive force on an unarmed man. They asked a question. That's all. And for that, they were arrested. Now, the state wants to rewrite history, pretend that facts don't exist." She turned to the jury, her tone rising just slightly. "We will prove that not only were the charges manufactured, but the arresting officers falsified reports, destroyed evidence, and threatened a witness into silence. And when we expose that, suddenly, the story changed again. This isn't just a trial, ladies and gentlemen. It's a test of whether truth stands a chance in the face of institutional power." Amara sat. Victor Granger's smile thinned. Judge Tannenbaum nodded slowly. "Let's begin." The first witness was Sergeant Doyle, the arresting officer. He stood stiffly in his uniform, every medal and ribbon polished to gleaming perfection. Granger led him through a carefully rehearsed testimony. "We arrived at the scene around 7:50 p.m., Doyle said, to find the suspects interfering with a stop involving a suspicious individual." Granger nodded. "Did they comply when you asked them to step back?" "No, sir. They were confrontational. Aggressive. They distracted us, allowing the actual suspect to flee." Lenora leaned over to Amara. "Here comes the house of cards." Judge Tannenbaum turned. "Defense?" Amara rose. "Thank you, Your Honor." She approached Doyle with measured steps. "Sergeant Doyle, you're certain of the time of arrival?" "Yes. 7:50 p.m. And your report reflects that?" "It does." Amara walked to the defense table and picked up a printed document. "And how do you explain this?" she asked, handing it to the bailiff. The judge received the paper and adjusted her glasses. A pause. "This is a city dispatch log," Amara said. "It clearly states that Sergeant Doyle's patrol vehicle arrived on scene at 8:04 p.m. 14 minutes after the time listed in his report. The courtroom buzzed. Granger stood. Objection. That log may be misaligned with actual arrival. Amara turned. Then why does the GPS data from the patrol vehicle match the log to the second? Tannenbaum glanced between them. Overruled. Amara nodded. So, Sergeant Doyle, you weren't on scene when you claimed you witnessed our aggression, were you? Doyle blinked. I must have misremembered. A 14-minute memory lapse? Lenora said loudly from the table. The courtroom erupted in light laughter. Granger's face twitched. Amara leaned closer. Would you like to revise your statement? Doyle said nothing. No further questions. During recess, the sisters sat outside the courthouse on the concrete steps. Lenora scrolled through her phone. Social media is lighting up. Hashtag Wells Twins is trending. Amara was silent. What? Lenora asked. Amara finally looked up. They're losing control, but they'll try something bigger. Harder. This isn't just about winning the case anymore. We're pulling at something they don't want exposed. Lenore nodded slowly. Then we pull harder. That night, just after midnight, the lock on their apartment door clicked. The room was dark. A tall figure stepped inside, careful, deliberate. From beneath the couch, Lenora's hand slipped around a flashlight. In a burst of motion, she flicked it on and swung it toward the intruder's face. A stunned man in a plain black coat blinked in the beam. Maya raised her phone from behind the kitchen counter. Smile. You're on camera. The man lunged, but Amara was already running, her bare feet slapping the floor. She tackled him low, and the man went crashing into a coffee table. Lenora grabbed her phone and dialed. We've got an intruder, address 112 South Jefferson. Now. By the time police arrived, the man had fled through the fire escape, but not before leaving behind something damning. His wallet. Inside, a badge. Officer Marcus Nolan. Internal Affairs. They stared at it. Why would someone from Internal Affairs break in? Lenora whispered. Amara stared out the window. Because we're one step from blowing this whole thing open. The next morning, Judge Tannenbaum called them into chambers. This is no longer a simple case, she said coldly, holding up a sealed folder. There are whispers of deeper corruption, outside my courtroom. Surveillance footage. Missing case files. Threats. And now I hear you were attacked in your own home? Yes, Your Honor, Amara said. Tannenbaum's expression flickered. You have 48 hours to prove your theory of misconduct. If you can't, I will dismiss your accusations and issue a gag order. Do I make myself clear? Lenora spoke softly. Crystal. Back at their grandmother's apartment, they spread everything they had across the living room floor. Witness statements. Log files. Court records. The badge from the intruder. It still wasn't enough. They needed something undeniable. Then the doorbell rang. Standing there was a familiar face, Jerome Carter, the man from the night of the protest. Only this time, his eye was bruised. His lips swollen. I thought I could stay quiet, he said. But I saw what they're doing to you. And it's not right. He handed Amara a flash drive. I had a body cam. My own. The night we were arrested. Amara stared. You filmed it? Jerome nodded. I didn't trust the cops not to lie. I hid it in my shoe. They loaded the footage onto their laptop. There it was. Crystal clear audio of the officers threatening Amara and Lenora. Doyle screaming, "You girls think you're lawyers? You'll be cellmates when I'm done with you." And then the slap of a phone hitting pavement. The sisters sat in silence, staring at the screen. Finally, Lenora said, This changes everything." Amara looked up, her eyes burning with resolve. "No," she said. "This confirms everything." The sky over the city was still dark when Amara and Lenora stood outside Channel 9 News headquarters, the flash drive clenched in Amara's fist like a key to justice. The building's lights flickered in the early morning haze. This wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't a government office. But it might be the most important place they'd enter yet. Inside, the newsroom was alive with early bird producers barking edits, typing furiously. Coffee cups and half-eaten pastries littered every surface. Maya and Lenora made their way toward the conference room, where a woman in a red blazer waited, Talia Monroe, the network's senior political correspondent. She didn't stand when they entered. Just gestured to the chairs. "Show me." Amara slid the flash drive across the table. Talia plugged it into her laptop and hit play. For 10 minutes, no one spoke. On-screen, the footage from Jerome's hidden camera rolled, officers pushing the girls, voices thick with menace, Sergeant Doyle issuing threats. And the worst part, His own confession, said into a radio, unaware the device still captured his words. "They think they're smart. I'll bury these bitches before they make it to court." Talia paused the video and looked up slowly. "Do you have any idea what this is going to do?" "Yes," Amara replied. "That's why we're here." 2 hours later, a breaking news alert went live across 3 major networks. New evidence reveals possible police misconduct and prosecution tampering in high-profile civil rights case. Clips from the footage rolled on national TV, followed by a side-by-side comparison with the official police reports. The discrepancies were glaring. Unavoidable. The internet exploded. Hashtags like #WellsSisters, #CourtroomTruth, and #Jerome Carter trended within the hour. Public opinion shifted like a tidal wave. Messages of support flooded in from across the country. And inside the courthouse, the storm hit hard. Ada Granger looked like he hadn't slept. His hands trembled slightly as he stood in front of Judge Tannenbaum's bench, trying to keep his voice level. "Your Honor, this so-called evidence was obtained outside the appropriate chain of custody. It cannot be admitted into court." Judge Tannenbaum held up a hand, her expression granite. This footage was submitted to the court by a third-party witness, accompanied by a sworn affidavit. It is admissible. Granger's jaw clenched. Even if it was manipulated. "Enough," the judge said. "Sit down." The courtroom buzzed. Amara and Lenora sat composed at the defense table, but beneath the surface, their adrenaline surged. They weren't just defending themselves anymore. They were making history. The prosecution's witnesses began to falter. One by one, the officers called to testify hesitated on the stand. Their stories no longer aligned. The footage had disrupted the script. And then, the unthinkable happened. Captain Henry Keller, a name whispered throughout the department as someone untouchable, walked into court, summoned by the defense. He sat tall on the stand, calm as if reading a budget report. Amara stepped forward, her voice cold and cutting. "Captain Keller, you were present at the precinct the night my sister and I were booked. Correct?" He nodded once. "And did you see the booking logs?" "I did." Amara slid another document onto the screen. "This is the original record, time-stamped. And yet, here is an altered version submitted as evidence in this trial. Can you explain the difference?" Keller hesitated. The room stilled. "That must be a clerical error." Lenora scoffed loudly. "Isn't it amazing how often those errors protect powerful men?" Judge Tannenbaum didn't scold her. Amara pressed on. "Is it also a clerical error that the surveillance footage from the precinct is missing for the exact hour we were held?" No comment. "Did you order its deletion?" "Objection," Granger barked. "Withdrawn," Amara said calmly. "Let me ask it differently, did you approve the officer who arrested us despite his report being contradictory to dispatch logs?" Keller's mouth twitched. He said nothing. "Captain," Judge Tannenbaum said sternly. "Answer the question." He inhaled sharply. "Yes." Gasps filled the room. Granger's pen dropped from his hand. The judge sat back, stunned. Amara turned toward the gallery. "The defense rests." Outside the courthouse, it felt like a revolution. Protesters gathered in waves, holding signs, "Truth is on trial. Let them speak. Justice for the Wells sisters." Local media couldn't keep up. CNN requested interviews. A New York Times reporter camped outside their home. Inside, however, the pressure mounted. That night, as Lenora made tea, Amara sat reviewing files for the 100th time. Her laptop chimed. A message. From an unknown number. "You're shaking the wrong tree. People are watching. People who don't like being seen." She showed it to Lenora. "Now they're trying the veiled threat route again," Amara muttered. Lenora sipped her tea. "They're scared. Which means they're dangerous." The following day, as if on cue, news broke that Jerome Carter had been placed under arrest, again. No charges listed. Just protective custody. Amara slammed her laptop shut. "They're hiding him. We need to file an emergency petition," Lenora said. "I already emailed Judge Tannenbaum." Minutes later, her response came. "I've scheduled a closed hearing. Bring everything you have." At the emergency hearing, the courtroom was empty save for Judge Tannenbaum, the sisters, Granger, and 2 federal observers now brought in due to the national spotlight. The judge stared hard at Granger. "Mr. Granger, why is Mr. Jerome Carter in protective custody without charges?" Granger stammered. "He was at risk. We believe there may have been threats against his life." "Do you have any proof?" "Confidential sources." "That's not an answer," the judge snapped. She turned to Amara. "Defense, What do you request? Immediate release of Jerome Carter and a formal investigation into prosecutorial misconduct. Tannenbaum's eyes scanned the room. Granted. I am also referring this entire case to the Department of Justice for an independent inquiry. Granger's face went ashen. Amara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Outside the courthouse, the tide had turned completely. Jerome Carter was released hours later, giving a heartfelt press statement. They risked everything to protect someone like me. I won't let that be for nothing. That night, as Maya and Lenora sat in their grandmother's kitchen, Evelyn set a tray of steaming biscuits in front of them. I watched you on TV today, she said softly. Lenora raised an eyebrow. You okay, Nana? Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening. When I was your age, we used to dream of moments like this. But we never thought they'd come. Amara took her hand. They didn't come, she whispered. We made them. The dawn came without rest. Amara stood at the mirror in their apartment, adjusting the lapel of her navy blazer. The sun hadn't yet breached the city skyline, but the courthouse was already stirring. Today would be the final day. The verdict. The closing chapter of a fight that had nearly devoured them. Behind her, Lenora packed the last few folders into a briefcase. Still want to go through your closing remarks one more time? Amara didn't answer at first. She stared into her own reflection, as if trying to see past the surface. Past the fear. Past the trauma. She finally spoke. No. I've said everything I needed to. Now it's time they listen. Lenora stepped up behind her, resting a hand on her sister's shoulder. They will. The courtroom was overflowing. Every seat taken. Journalists filled the back rows. Security doubled. Spectators stood shoulder to shoulder in the hallway, pressed against glass, watching history unfold. Judge Tannenbaum entered, her face unreadable. All rise. As everyone took their seats, she gestured for the final statements to begin. Assistant District Attorney Granger rose first. His voice cracked ever so slightly as he began. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. This case has taken many turns. There have been accusations. There has been doubt. But at the core of this is a question of law and order. He cleared his throat. We believe the defendants acted in defiance of the law, regardless of their intentions. That they escalated a police matter and... Lenora stood suddenly. Objection. The prosecution is attempting to reframe facts already disproven in court. Tannenbaum raised an eyebrow. Sustained. Stick to verified events, Mr. Granger. Granger hesitated. His composure slipping. That's all, Your Honor. The silence was deafening. Tannenbaum turned toward the defense table. Miss Wells. Amara rose, slow and calm, like water building behind a dam. Then she walked to the center of the courtroom and began. I want you all to take a long look around this room. She turned slowly, meeting every gaze. Every bench. Every nameplate. Every face. This is what power looks like. And for people like me and my sister, we were never meant to be in this space. At least not standing. Not speaking. She paused. We were supposed to be handcuffed. Silenced. Humiliated. We were supposed to be statistics. But we refused. She stepped forward. We refused because silence is complicity. We refused because truth is louder than power when you speak it out loud. And we refused because our lives, our freedom, was never up for debate. Granger shifted uncomfortably. Amara's voice only grew stronger. You've seen the evidence. You've heard the lies. The broken protocols. The hidden reports. The threats. The attempt to erase us from the record. She glanced back at Lenora, who nodded. So no, we didn't break the law. We broke the silence. And that's something this system never forgives. Her eyes flicked to Judge Tannenbaum. But maybe, today, it remembers what justice was supposed to mean. She returned to her seat. The room remained frozen. The jury deliberated for only 90 minutes. Have you reached a verdict? Judge Tannenbaum asked as the foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. She nodded. Please read it aloud. The foreman unfolded the paper, his voice steady. In the case of the People v. Amara and Lenora Wells, we the jury find the defendants not guilty on all charges. A gasp swept the room. Tears welled in Amara's eyes. Lenora exhaled, clutching her sister's hand. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. Outside, the crowd erupted into cheers. Amara felt the weight of 1,000 years lift from her chest, but she also knew. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Later that day, they sat on the courthouse steps, flanked by microphones and flashing cameras. A journalist asked, "What's next for the Wells sisters?" Lenora smiled. "We go back to work. Are you planning to file charges against the officers who arrested you?" Amara leaned forward. "Absolutely. But it's bigger than that. This wasn't just about us. This was about every voice that's been ignored. Every truth buried under bureaucracy." The crowd murmured with approval. Then another question: "Some sources say you've received threats since exposing Captain Keller and Ada Granger. Do you feel safe?" Amara didn't blink. "Justice isn't safe. But it's worth it." 3 days later, a federal investigation was announced. Ada Granger was suspended without pay. Captain Keller resigned quietly, under the weight of mounting public pressure. And Victor Harrington? He vanished. Gone without a trace. No statements. No charges. Just silence. But that silence felt different now. It wasn't suppression. It was fear. A week passed. Then came the letter. It was addressed in careful handwriting. No return address. Just 3 words. "Keep going. J." Inside was a single photograph. A courtroom. But not just any courtroom, it was a black woman in a robe behind the bench. A judge. Amara stared at it for a long time. Then looked at her sister. Lenora grinned. "So. You thinking what I'm thinking?" Amara nodded. "We build." Months passed. Amara and Lenora launched a non-profit called The Glass Bench, dedicated to helping young minority law students navigate the legal system and hold it accountable. They hosted workshops, mentored high school girls, and consulted on civil rights litigation. They turned their story into fuel for others. And through it all, they never forgot what brought them there: truth, resilience, and each other. On a warm summer evening, the 2 sisters returned to the now-famous courthouse, not as defendants, but as keynote speakers for a judicial ethics conference. Judge Tannenbaum greeted them with a tight smile. "I never thought I'd say this," she said, "but I learned something from you both." Lenora smirked. Never too late. They walked into the courtroom again. Same marble walls. Same wooden benches. But now, the air felt lighter. The silence, softer. The fight had scarred them. Worn them thin. But it had also sharpened them into something no system could ever erase. As they took the stage, Amara looked out at the sea of young faces watching her. She thought about all the days they'd wanted to quit. About the nights she cried in silence. About the cold floor of that holding cell. She raised her voice. "You are not powerless. You are not voiceless. You are not alone." She gestured to her sister beside her. "We proved that. And now, it's your turn."